Something quietly shifted inside the Philadelphia Eagles, and if you've been following every move this offseason closely, you can feel that this isn't just routine roster management. This is a front office actively reshaping key parts of the team while leaving just enough uncertainty to keep everyone guessing about what comes next. Let's start with the secondary, because that's where the most noticeable changes are happening right now. The safety position in particular has turned into one of the most intriguing battles on the roster. Drew Makuba is expected to return as the top option after his injury, and there's a real belief inside the organization that he can bring a more aggressive playmaking presence on the back end. But the real story is who lines up next to him. Marcus Epps is back in the picture, and this isn't just a depth move. When Makuba went down last season, Epps stepped in and started the final stretch of games, and by all accounts, he handled that responsibility well. When you combine that with his previous experience, including 25 starts during his earlier time with the Eagles and a total of 49 career starts, you start to see why he's being viewed as the steady veteran option. He's not flashy, but he brings stability, and that matters in a defense that's clearly going through a transition. But don't overlook Michael Carter III, because this is where things get really interesting. The Eagles are planning to transition him from slot cornerback to safety, and internally, there's real confidence that this isn't just an experiment. Carter has played 73 games in his career, mostly in the nickel role, and the team believes his skill set can translate smoothly to safety. If that transition clicks during training camp, he could legitimately push for that starting spot. This isn't just a backup plan, this is a real competition that could define how the secondary looks in 2026. And here's where it gets even more layered. The Eagles didn't just reshuffle internally, they made external moves that signaled this position is far from settled. Trading Sidney Brown and moving on from Reed Blankenship opened the door for a complete reset at safety depth. They also added JT Gray, but the expectation is that his primary impact will come on special teams rather than as a defensive starter. That tells you something important. The team is still searching. This isn't a finished product. Now, zooming out a bit, this approach reflects something bigger about how Howie Roseman is operating right now. There's flexibility being built into the roster, especially with the draft still ahead. The Eagles are clearly leaving room to either draft a safety or explore trade options if the right opportunity presents itself. And when you hear that, it reinforces the idea that what we're seeing today might look very different by the time the season actually begins. And it's not just the secondary. There are ripple effects across the roster, especially on offense. There's ongoing discussion about the wide receiver group, and it all hinges on one major question: what happens with AJ Brown? Despite still being highly productive, even in what some considered a down year, there's tension there, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. At 28 years old, he still holds significant trade value, and there's a growing sense that the Eagles could consider moving him if they believe it benefits the long-term structure of the team. That possibility directly impacts draft strategy. If the Eagles bring in another receiver before the draft, they can afford to wait and target someone in the middle rounds. But if they don't, suddenly the urgency increases, and names like Omar Cooper start to make a lot more sense early. He's got the speed, the versatility to play inside or outside, and the ability to create yards after the catch. Exactly the kind of profile that could fit into this evolving offense. And speaking of the offense, there's also a quiet sense of optimism as BYB the new offensive coordinator. Sean Mannion may not be a big name hire yet, but those who have worked with him believe he's going to connect well with Jalen Hurts and bring a fresh approach that players will respect. That's another variable in all of this. A new voice shaping how this offense operates could influence personnel decisions more than people expect. So when you step back and look at everything together, the uncertainty at safety, the potential shakeup at wide receiver, the flexibility heading into the draft, and a new offensive coordinator entering the mix, you start to realize this team is being carefully restructured, not just patched up. The Eagles are still considered one of the most fascinating teams heading into 2026, but that comes with pressure. There's a real possibility this team could bounce back in a big way, or things could go in the opposite direction if these moves don't come together. And that's where I want to bring you into the conversation. With so many moving pieces, especially in the secondary and at wide receiver, do you think the Eagles are building towards something stronger? Or are they taking a bigger risk than it seems right now? And when you really sit with that question, it leads you to another layer of what the Eagles are doing right now. This isn't just about filling positions, it's about redefining identity. Because think about it, when a team reshapes its secondary this aggressively, it usually means they're preparing to play a different style of defense. With Drew Makuba expected to return as a more aggressive presence and the possibility of Marcus Epps providing stability next to him, the Eagles could be trying to balance risk and control on the back end. But if Michael Carter II actually wins that job and the transition fully clicks, then suddenly you're looking at a much more versatile and flexible secondary, one that can disguise coverages, rotate more fluidly, and adapt snap to snap. That kind of flexibility matters a lot in today's NFL, especially when you're facing high-powered offenses week after week, but it also comes with growing pains. Communication, positioning, timing. Those things don't just fall into place overnight, especially when you're mixing new roles with new players. That's why the next few months, particularly training camp, are going to be critical. This isn't just about who wins a starting job. It's about whether the unit can come together fast enough to hold up early in the season. Now bring that same lens over to the offense, and the situation becomes even more delicate. The uncertainty surrounding AJ Brown isn't just about one player. It's about what kind of offense the Eagles want to be moving forward. If he stays, you still have a proven, productive receiver who can anchor the passing game. But if the team seriously considers moving him, then everything changes. You're no longer just tweaking the offense. You're potentially reshaping it around a different structure, different playmakers, and possibly even a different distribution of targets. And that's where the draft becomes more than just adding talent. It becomes a pivot point. A player like Omar Cooper, with his ability to line up in multiple spots and create after the catch, wouldn't just be depth. He could represent a shift toward a more dynamic, spread out passing attack. But relying on a rookie to step into that kind of role comes with its own risks, especially for a team that's trying to stay competitive right now. At the same time, you can't ignore the bigger picture here. The Eagles are still viewed as a team with high expectations, but those expectations come with a microscope. After a season filled with noise and inconsistency, this roster is being evaluated at every level, from the front office decisions to the coaching staff to the leadership on the field. There's even the underlying pressure tied to how this season could impact the future of key figures within the organization. And that's why every move feels amplified. Even something like the addition of Rick Woolen on a one-year deal carries weight. It's not just about bringing in a talented cornerback. It's about making a calculated bet. A short-term contract with high upside suggests the Eagles believe he can make an immediate impact, but it also keeps their long-term flexibility intact. That's a recurring theme here. Calculated risks, short-term opportunities, long-term options. The same logic applies across the roster, whether it's giving Carter a chance at a new position, bringing back a veteran like Epps, or leaving room to make another move before the season starts. The Eagles are building in layers. They're not locking themselves into one path. They're creating multiple ways this can go. But here's the reality. Not all of those paths lead to success. If the secondary stabilizes quickly, if the offensive adjustments click, and if the locker room stays aligned despite the underlying tensions, this team absolutely has the talent to bounce back and win at a high level. But if those question marks turn into weaknesses, if the transitions take too long, if key decisions don't pay off, then this could become one of those seasons where things unravel faster than expected, and that's what makes this moment so compelling. You're not just watching a team prepare for a season, you're watching an organization walk a very fine line between retooling and risking too much at once. So now it really comes down to you. How do you see this playing out? Do you trust these moves and the direction the Eagles are heading? Or do you think there are too many uncertainties for this to work the way they're hoping? And the truth is, the next move really can change everything, because the Eagles are one of those teams right now where a single decision could tip the balance in a completely different direction. Take a closer look at how they're approaching the rest of the roster, especially the edge and overall defensive front. There's an underlying storyline that hasn't gotten as much attention but could quietly become just as important as the secondary changes. Brandon Graham potentially returning adds experience and leadership, but at this stage of his career, you're not asking him to carry the unit, you're asking him to complement it. And that raises a bigger question. Do the Eagles have enough consistent impact off the edge? Or is that another position where a move is still coming? Because when you connect that with everything happening in the secondary, it becomes clear. These decisions are not isolated. A more aggressive or less experienced secondary puts more pressure on the pass rush. If the front doesn't get home consistently, that back end is exposed. So if the Eagles are betting on versatility and transition at safety, they may also need to reinforce the defensive line to make that approach sustainable. And this is exactly why Howie Roseman has kept things flexible. There's still time before the season. There's still the draft. There's still the trade market. And based on everything we're seeing, it would actually be surprising if this is the final version of the roster. The Eagles have positioned themselves to react, not out of desperation, but out of strategy. Now bring that back to the offensive side one more time, because the ripple effects there could be even bigger. If A.J. Brown stays, the Eagles can maintain a certain identity, physical, reliable, built around proven production. But if they move him, it's not just about replacing talent, it's about redistributing responsibility. It could mean more emphasis on DeVonta Smith, more opportunities for younger receivers, and potentially a system that relies more on scheme than individual dominance. And that's where the new offensive coordinator, Sean Mannion, becomes even more important. This isn't just about calling plays, it's about shaping the offense around whatever pieces are ultimately in place. If he truly connects well with Jalen Hurts, as some believe, then there's a real chance the offense evolves in a way that surprises people. But again, that's another projection, another variable. And when you stack all these variables together, secondary changes, wide receiver uncertainty, potential defensive line questions, a new offensive voice, you start to understand why this team is being viewed under such a strong spotlight. This isn't a team quietly preparing in the background. This is a team being watched closely because the range of outcomes is so wide. They could come out of this as one of the most balanced and dangerous teams in the league, with a refreshed identity and the flexibility to adapt week to week. Or they could struggle early with too many moving parts trying to come together at once. And usually, seasons like that are decided by the smallest details. A position battle won in camp, a mid-season adjustment, a move nobody saw coming. That's why even right now, it feels like we're still in the middle of the story, not at the end of it. And that's exactly why you can't look at this offseason as a finished puzzle. It's still being built piece by piece, and some of the most important decisions might not even have happened yet. Because when a team operates like this, leaving flexibility, creating internal competition, avoiding long-term commitments in certain spots, it usually means they're waiting for the right opportunity to strike. Not just any move, but the move that aligns everything. And for the Eagles, that could come in multiple forms. It could be a draft night decision that nobody expects. If the board doesn't fall the way they anticipate, don't be surprised if they pivot quickly, whether that means trading up, trading back, or targeting a position that hasn't been heavily discussed. The groundwork is already there for that kind of adaptability, and when you consider how many positions still have some level of uncertainty, they're in a position to justify almost any direction they choose, or it could come after the draft. That's something a lot of people overlook, but it matters. Once other teams finalize their rosters, veterans become available, trade conversations reopen, and suddenly new options appear. The Eagles have kept enough cap flexibility and roster space to take advantage of that phase as well. So even if things look set on paper after the draft, that doesn't necessarily mean the front office is done. And that brings us back to the core idea behind everything we've talked about. This is a calculated balancing act. They're balancing experience with upside. They're balancing stability with experimentation. They're balancing short-term competitiveness with long-term planning. But the reality is, balancing acts are difficult to sustain over time. At